She arrived elegantly, but filled with doubts inside. A familiar necklace on another's neck changed everything. The shame came before everyone, cruel and calculated. But in that instant, something within her awoke. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The ballroom of the Grand Palace Hotel in the heart of Mayfair, London, gleamed under crystal chandeliers imported from Europe. Every detail had been designed to impress, from the white orchids strategically arranged in monumental displays to the string quartet playing soft melodies as guests arrived, one by one, showcasing their most expensive jewels and designer gowns. That Saturday night in late October promised to be the most talked-about event of London's charity season. Evelyn Nightingale took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. Her delicate, trembling hands smoothed the navy blue silk dress that fell elegantly over her 6-month pregnant belly. The fabric was noble, the drape perfect, but she knew that no dress in the world would be able to hide the discomfort she felt inside. Beside her, Richard Maxwell, her husband of 4 years, adjusted the knot of his Italian tie and offered his arm with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That gesture, which once signified protection and complicity, now seemed merely a performance for the cameras that were already beginning to flash around them. Flashes popped incessantly. Social column journalists shouted questions about the pregnancy, about the company, about the contribution they would make to that noble cause of helping underprivileged children. Richard responded with the ease of someone born for it. The 38-year-old entrepreneur who commanded one of the largest construction companies in the county, always with the right word on the tip of his tongue, always with that calculated charm that enchanted investors and irritated competitors. Evelyn smiled beside him, but her smile was a well-rehearsed mask, the result of months spent learning to hide the pain that grew within her, along with the baby. When they finally crossed the red carpet and entered the air-conditioned ballroom, Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was something more visceral, almost a premonition. Her eyes scanned the room and soon found what they were looking for, even if she didn't want to admit it to herself. On the other side of the ballroom near the French Champagne Bar stood Marianne Thompson, Richard's company's public relations director, and she was dazzling. The red dress Marianne wore was a controlled scandal, tight enough to make it clear that her body had been sculpted in expensive gyms and maintained with almost military discipline. Her brown hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders, and her crimson lipstick matched the color of the dress exactly. But none of that was what made Evelyn's heart clench in her chest. It was the necklace, that damned white gold necklace with a heart-shaped diamond pendant, shining under. The lights like a deliberate offense, like a war trophy displayed in enemy territory. Evelyn knew that necklace well. Very well. It had been a wedding anniversary gift that Richard had given her 2 years ago on a romantic, candle-lit dinner night. At the time, she had cried with emotion upon opening the little blue Tiffany box. She had kept that jewel as a symbol of the love she believed to be eternal. But 6 months ago, on a common Thursday afternoon, the necklace had simply disappeared from her jewelry box. Richard had said she must have put it somewhere, else that she was becoming forgetful because of the pregnancy, that it was normal. Evelyn even doubted herself, blamed hormones, believed her own confusion. Until that moment, until she saw that necklace on another woman's neck, on the neck of the woman her husband spent more time with than with her. Richard released Evelyn's arm as soon as they entered the ballroom, mumbled something about greeting important investors, and disappeared among groups of tie-wearing men discussing business, while their wives chatted about trips to the Caribbean and which plastic surgeon was the best in Canary Wharf. Evelyn stood there, a solitary island amidst an ocean of fake people, and bought smiles. It was then that she noticed the glances, too subtle to be casual, too intense to be innocent. Some women whispered behind wine glasses, their eyes going from Evelyn to Marianne, from Marianne to Richard, forming the triangle that everyone there seemed to know, except the story's protagonist herself until a few months ago. She felt her cheeks burn, but maintained her upright posture, her head held high, as her mother had always taught her. A nightingale does not show weakness in public. Helen, her only true friend in that environment of vipers in designer gowns, appeared beside her with 2 glasses of fresh orange juice. Helen was married to one of the company's minority partners and had known Evelyn since college, before all that circus of arranged marriages and financial interests disguised as love. "She's provoking you on purpose," Helen whispered, handing one of the glasses to Evelyn. "She wants you to make a scene, to lose your composure. Don't give her that satisfaction." Evelyn accepted the glass with trembling hands. "I know," she replied softly, but her voice faltered. "It's my necklace, Helen. The necklace Richard gave me." Helen squeezed her friend's arm tightly, in a gesture of silent solidarity. "I know, dear. Everyone here knows. And that's exactly why you need to keep your head up. Don't let them destroy you." But Helen's words, however well-intentioned, seemed to echo hollowly within Evelyn's chest. How could she keep her head up when her husband openly flirted with his mistress a few meters away? How could she pretend everything was fine when the baby she carried in her womb grew in an environment of lies and betrayals? How could she smile at those people who looked at her with thinly veiled pity, who whispered her name as if she were the joke of the night? Dinner was served at round tables, seating 10, decorated with more white flowers and scented candles. Evelyn was placed at the main table, beside Richard, as protocol dictated. Marianne, strategically, was 3 seats to the left, between a French investor and the wife of an MP. Throughout the meal, Evelyn barely touched her food, despite being pregnant and needing to eat. Each mouthful seemed to pass through her throat like ground glass. Richard chatted animatedly with the guests, told jokes, laughed loudly, made toast after toast, and at no point looked at his wife. At no point did he ask if she was well, if she needed anything, if the baby was moving. It was Marianne who stood up first when the cake was brought out. A 5-tiered cake, white as snow, covered in frosting and sugar flowers, as exaggerated as everything else that night. The public relations director, always efficient in her role as event orchestrator, took the microphone and began a speech about the importance of charity, about how Richard Maxwell's company was committed to social causes, about how that night represented hope for so many needy children. Evelyn watched everything with a knot in her throat. She observed the way Marianne gesticulated, confident and powerful, owning that stage. She observed how Richard looked at her with poorly disguised admiration. She observed how the necklace swayed on her neck every time she moved, like a hypnotic provocation. And then it happened. Marianne, while demonstrating how to cut the cake for the official photograph, slipped. Or at least, that's what it seemed. Her sky-high heels failed, her body unbalanced forward, and the slice of cake she held on a silver spatula flew towards Evelyn. In slow motion, or so it seemed to those who experienced that moment, the white cake covered in sugary frosting crossed the 1.5 meters that separated the 2 women and splattered onto Evelyn's lap, staining her navy blue dress with an explosion of creamy white. The entire ballroom fell silent for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, that moment suspended in time where everything could still have been different. But then the murmurs began. Low at first, gradually growing like a wave forming in the sea before breaking on the sand. Some guests laughed, restrained and embarrassed laughs, but laughs nonetheless. Others put their hands to their mouths, shocked. Cell phones came out of pockets and purses. Cameras turned to capture the moment of public humiliation. Evelyn remained motionless in her chair, the frosting dripping down her expensive dress, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Inside her belly, the baby moved strongly, as if feeling the emotional storm sweeping through its mother's body. She placed her hand on her belly instinctively, that universal gesture of maternal protection, and something inside her broke. It wasn't tears threatening to fall from her eyes. It was something deeper, more primitive. It was anger. It was weariness. It was dignity trampled too much. Marianne approached with a napkin in hand, pretending to be mortified. "Oh my God, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. It was an accident, I swear. These heels, the slippery floor, I didn't see. I'm sorry. But her eyes weren't apologizing. Her eyes sparkled with something very different. Satisfaction, triumph, calculated cruelty. Richard finally stood up, but not to console his wife. He stood to appease the guests, to make a joke of the situation, to turn Evelyn's humiliation into something anecdotal that everyone could laugh at and forget. "Oh, these things happen, right, everyone? Good thing it wasn't red wine." And he turned to Marianne with a complacent smile. "Don't worry, Marie, it was an accident, everyone saw." Marie. He called her Marie, in front of everyone, in front of his pregnant wife covered in cake, with that intimate familiarity that only exists between people who share much more than a workplace. Evelyn stood up slowly. The frosting dripped onto the marble floor, forming small white puddles at her feet. She looked at Richard, at Marianne, at all those faces watching, her as if she were part of the evening's entertainment, and she realized with a painful yet liberating clarity that she was completely alone in that place. She had no allies there. She had no protection. She had only her growing belly, her baby moving, and a truth she could no longer ignore. Her marriage was a lie, her life was a farce, and she had been complicit in her own humiliation for too long. Without saying a word, she walked towards the ballroom exit. Each step was a monumental effort, not because of the weight of her pregnancy, but because of the weight of the shame and pain she carried. Guests moved away, making way as if she were contagious. No one offered help. No one asked if she was well. They just watched, photographed, whispered. Helen ran after her in the hotel corridors. "Evelyn, wait! I'll take you home. You can't drive like this." But Evelyn didn't want to go home. That house, with its expensive furniture and its walls empty of true love, was no longer her home. She didn't know where she wanted to go, but she knew she couldn't stay there for another second. It was in that deserted corridor, far from the lights and cameras, that Evelyn finally allowed the tears to fall. She collapsed onto a red velvet sofa near the elevators, while Helen sat beside her and held her hand. The baby continued to move, as if trying to remind her that there was still life growing inside, still hope, still reasons to move forward. But in that moment, Evelyn couldn't see hope. She could only feel pain and anger. So much anger. What she didn't know, as she cried in that corridor, was that small security cameras had captured everything. Every second of the humiliation, every angle of the slip that wasn't so accidental after all, and she also didn't know that at that exact moment, over 100 kilometers away, in her seaside home in Brighton, a woman with graying hair but an imperial posture was watching the images that a trusted security guard had just sent her. Marina Nightingale, the matriarch of the Nightingale family, one of the most powerful women in the British business scene, clenched her fists upon seeing her daughter humiliated in that way. She had distanced herself from Evelyn's life 4 years ago after a family disagreement caused precisely by the marriage to Richard Maxwell, a man Marina had never approved of. But now, seeing those images, something ancestral and fierce awoke within her. No one humiliated a Nightingale. No one. She picked up the phone and made 3 calls, the first to her personal lawyer, the second to a private detective who had worked for the family for decades, the third to her driver. Within an hour she would be in London, and when Marina Nightingale arrived, the game would completely change. But all this Evelyn still didn't know. In that moment, alone in a hotel corridor with a stained dress and a broken heart, she felt like the most defeated person in the world. The baby moved again, stronger this time, and she placed both hands on her belly. "I will protect you," she whispered to her unborn child. "I don't know how, but I will, I promise." And as she made that promise, something began to change within her. It was small still, fragile like the first crack in a block of ice, but it was there. The seed of a strength she didn't know she possessed. The certainty that she wouldn't fall without a fight, that her child wouldn't grow up seeing his mother humiliated, that she had hit rock bottom and now there was only one way to go: up. The corridor lights flickered, announcing the end of the main event in the ballroom. Soon the guests would begin to leave. They would pass by her, look again, whisper, But Evelyn, for the first time on that terrible night, didn't care. Let them look. Let them talk. Because the woman sitting on that sofa was no longer the same one who had entered the event hours ago. Something fundamental had broken, yes, but in the process, something new was beginning to be born. And that something had a name: strength. Helen remained by her side in silence, respecting the moment, offering only her presence as comfort. And so, together in that corridor, they waited while outside in London and beyond, invisible gears began to move, preparing the ground for what was to come, for the storm that was coming, for the justice that needed to be served, because this story was just beginning. And tell me your opinion of this story and how you think it will end. The dawn arrived cold by Londoner standards. Evelyn was sitting on Helen's apartment balcony, wrapped in a woolen blanket, watching the lights of the city that never fully slept. She had refused to go home, to that apartment in Mayfair that she shared with Richard, where every room held memories of a happiness she now realized had been invented. Helen didn't insist. She just prepared the guest room, brought a chamomile tea, and stayed there, in silent solidarity, until Evelyn finally stopped crying. Evelyn's cell phone hadn't stopped vibrating since they left the hotel. Messages, calls, social media notifications. The internet had done its work with cruel efficiency. Videos of the incident were already circulating, with sensationalist captions and comments ranging from compassion to the cruelest mockery. Hashtags about the case were already trending. The pregnant woman humiliated at a gala event had become entertainment for millions of people who didn't know her, who would never know her real pain, but who felt entitled to comment on her life. Richard had called 17 times, sent 43 messages. Evelyn read only the first 3 before blocking him. All followed the same pattern, minimizing the incident, blaming her for leaving the event, accusing her of being unnecessarily dramatic. In none of them did he ask if she was well, if the baby was well. In none of them did he truly apologize. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in orange hues over the grey horizon of the buildings, Helen stepped out onto the balcony with 2 cups of fresh coffee. "You need to rest," she said softly, handing a cup to Evelyn. "The baby needs you to rest." Evelyn accepted the coffee, but didn't drink it. She just held the cup between her hands, feeling the warmth against her cold palms. "How did I let it get to this point, Helen? When did I become this woman? This shadow who accepts crumbs and calls it love?" Helen sat beside her friend, choosing her words carefully. "You didn't become this woman, Evelyn. You've always been strong. But Richard is manipulative. He knows exactly where to push to make you doubt yourself. That's how men like him work. They destroy slowly, in homeopathic doses of poison, until you no longer recognize who you were." Before Evelyn could respond, the apartment doorbell rang. Helen frowned, not expecting visitors so early. Through the intercom, a man's polite voice introduced himself as Mrs. Marina Nightingale's driver. Evelyn's heart pounded. Her mother. Here. After 4 years of almost absolute silence, Marina Nightingale entered the apartment like a force of nature contained in elegance. At 62, she wore an impeccable white pantsuit, grey hair tied in a low bun, discreet but perfect makeup. Her eyes, the same honey tone as Evelyn's, swept the room until they found her daughter still on the balcony. For a moment, mother and daughter just looked at each other through the glass door. 4 years of resentment, pride, and unspoken love oscillating between them like an invisible abyss. It was Marina who moved first. She crossed the living room with firm steps and opened the balcony door. Evelyn stood up instinctively, as if she were once again the girl who respected and feared maternal authority in equal measure. "Mother," she began to say, but Marina raised her hand, asking for silence. "No," Marina said, her voice firm but not harsh. "You won't explain yourself. You won't justify yourself. I saw everything. I saw what they did to you, and I came to get my daughter." Evelyn felt her legs weaken. All the defenses she had built over the past 4 years, all the armor of independence and pride collapsed at once. She fell into her mother's arms like a child, and finally, after holding back so much, broke down in a deep, visceral cry that came from a place far beyond the previous night's humiliation. It came from years of disguised loneliness, of unrequited love, of pretending everything was fine when nothing was. Marina held her daughter tightly, one hand stroking her hair, as she used to when Evelyn was little and woke from nightmares. But her eyes over her daughter's head were pure steel. Helen recognized that look. It was the look of a woman declaring war. 2 hours later, the three women were sitting at the kitchen table. Marina had taken control of the situation with the natural ease of someone born to lead. She had made calls, given orders, mobilized her network of contacts. On the table, a brown folder was already beginning to fill with documents that a messenger had just delivered. Evelyn looked at those papers without fully understanding. They were bank statements, corporate travel records, financial reports from Richard's company. "How did you get all this so quickly?" she asked, still dazed. Marina took a sip of coffee before answering. "Darling, when you have the right resources and know where to look, information is the easiest commodity to obtain. And I always knew this man was rotten. I just hoped I was wrong for your sake, but I wasn't." She opened the folder and began to point out numbers, dates, inconsistencies. Her detective, a man named Paul Henry, who had worked for the Nightingale family for 20 years, had spent the entire night digging, and what he found was much worse than a simple marital infidelity. Richard had been embezzling funds from his own company for at least 2 years, small amounts at first, which increased as he gained confidence: fake corporate trips, contracts with shell companies, falsified invoices. All very well disguised, all seemingly legal in the official books. But the cracks were there, visible to those who knew where to look. "And Marianne?" Evelyn asked, her voice just a whisper. Did she know? Marina turned a few pages until she found what she was looking for. Photographs. Marianne and Richard in different situations, in a chic restaurant in Notting Hill, entering a hotel in Kensington. At the airport, boarding for Edinburgh on a weekend, Richard had said he was in important meetings, and in all the photos, the intimacy between them was too obvious to be denied. "She didn't just know," Marina said, closing the folder with a dry gesture. "She's an accomplice. Some of these shell companies are registered in the names of her relatives. She helped orchestrate the scheme, and you, my daughter, were the perfect smokescreen. The dedicated pregnant wife who legitimized the family man image he needed to maintain for investors." Evelyn felt nausea rise in her throat. She ran to the bathroom and vomited, unsure if it was from pregnancy sickness or the repulsion of what she had just discovered. When she returned, pale and trembling, she found her mother talking on the phone with someone, her voice low but authoritative. Helen had prepared toast and orange juice, insisting that Evelyn needed to eat something. "We have a meeting at 3 this afternoon," Marina announced after hanging up. "With my lawyers, we'll prepare a strategy. Divorce, lawsuit for moral damages, corporate fraud complaint. We will destroy this man financially and socially, Evelyn, but I need you with me. On this, I need to know if you're ready to fight." Evelyn looked at her hands, at the gold wedding band she still wore on her finger. Slowly, she began to take it off. It didn't come off easily. Her fingers were swollen from pregnancy, but she pulled with determination until the ring finally slipped off. She placed it on the table, among the documents of her husband's betrayal. "I'm ready," she said, and her voice didn't tremble. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Richard Maxwell was having the worst morning of his life. He had woken up, on the company office sofa, hungover and with a crumpled suit. He had drunk too much after Evelyn left the event, trying to drown out the discomfort he felt, even if he would never admit aloud that discomfort was called guilt. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. First it was the company partners, concerned about the negative repercussions of the viral video. Then it was his press officer, panicking over social media comments. Then it was his father, disappointed by the public scandal. And Marianne, who called 3 times, but he didn't answer, because for the first time he didn't want to hear her voice. What should have been a simple display of power, a way to put Evelyn in her place, to remind her that he was in charge of that relationship, had turned into a public relations nightmare. Richard was not stupid. He knew how to recognize when he had underestimated a situation, and now the damage was done. He tried to call Evelyn again. Number blocked, sent a message via WhatsApp. Only a grey tick, she hadn't even received it, or he was blocked too. He tried Helen's phone, voicemail. That's when real panic began to set. When Evelyn wasn't one to make a drama. She never had been. She swallowed, accepted, forgave. This absolute silence was new and terrifying. His lawyer arrived at noon, called in a hurry. He brought bad news, very bad. Someone had leaked information about the company's fiscal irregularities to a major financial newspaper. Nothing concrete yet, just insinuations, but enough to make auditors start asking questions, enough to make investors nervous. Richard felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. Leaked? How? Who would leak them? Those documents were locked, protected, hidden in layers of bureaucracy. Unless someone with a lot of power and a lot of resources was digging specifically for them, someone like Marina Nightingale. The penny dropped like a bucket of cold water. Marina. The mother-in-law who had always hated him. The woman he had convinced Evelyn to distance herself from, claiming she was controlling and manipulative. The matriarch of one of the most influential families in the country, with connections he couldn't even imagine. If Marina had decided to enter the fray, Richard was in serious trouble. Marianne appeared at the office without warning around 2 in the afternoon. She wore the same red dress from the previous night, which suggested she hadn't gone home. The necklace, however, was no longer around her neck. Richard looked at her with a mixture of desire and irritation. That woman had been his escape valve, his materialized fantasy, everything Evelyn had ceased to be with pregnancy and responsibilities. But now, looking at her in the harsh light of day, without the soft lights of expensive hotels and romantic dinners, he saw something different. He saw raw ambition, calculated interest. "We need to talk," Marianne said, closing the door behind her, "about what happened yesterday, about what we're going to do now." Richard ran a hand through his hair, tired. "It went too far, Marianne. The video is everywhere. Evelyn blocked me. My lawyer is talking about lawsuits. My father wants to remove me from the company presidency. All this because of a damned cake." Marianne crossed her arms, defensive. "You asked me to put her in her place, to show who's in charge. That's exactly what I did." "And look what happened," Richard practically yelled before controlling himself. The walls of that office weren't as thick as he would have liked. "Now I have the most powerful mother-in-law in London, probably, investigating every penny I've ever spent. Do you have any idea what that means?" Marianne's face paled. "Marina Nightingale? She's involved?" "Apparently so. And if she's digging, she'll find things, Marianne. She'll find the shell companies, the trips, the overpriced contracts. She'll find everything. And when she does, it won't just be my neck on the guillotine. It'll be yours too." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken accusations and very real fears. Marianne, always so confident and controlled, seemed to have shrunk inside the red dress that suddenly seemed too tacky for daylight. Meanwhile, at Helen's house, Evelyn finished getting ready for the meeting with the lawyers. She had chosen a discreet dress in shades of beige, pulled her hair into a low ponytail, and worn only light makeup to disguise the dark circles under her eyes from the sleepless night. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman she saw reflected. Her eyes held something different. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was determination. It was contained fury. It was strength being born from the ashes of humiliation. Her mother waited in the living room, reviewing documents on her tablet. Seeing Evelyn, she nodded with approval. "You look beautiful and strong. Exactly what you need to be today." In the car on the way to the law firm, Marina held her daughter's hand. "I need you to understand one thing, Evelyn. What we're going to do isn't revenge. It's justice, it's protection. Richard committed crimes. Marianne is an accomplice. They need to answer for that. And more importantly, you need to be safe, financially and emotionally, for when your child is born." Evelyn squeezed her mother's hand back. "I know, Mother. And I know I distanced myself from you because of him. That I let Richard convince me you were the problem. Forgive me for being so blind." Marina shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "There's nothing to forgive. You were in love, and he took advantage of it. But now you see. And we're going to fix this together." The law firm occupied 2 entire floors of a commercial building on Oxford Street. They were the best in the city, specializing in family and corporate law. When Evelyn and Marina entered the meeting room, 3 lawyers were already waiting, surrounded by piles of documents and open laptops. Dr. Nightingale, the oldest of them, a grey-haired man with gold spectacles, greeted, "We've brought everything you requested, and we must say, the case is worse than we imagined." In the following hours, Evelyn listened as her marriage was dissected in legal and financial terms. Every one of Richard's lies, every betrayal, every embezzlement, transformed into evidence, lawsuits, legal strategies. It was painful. It was necessary. It was liberating in a strange, cathartic way. When they left the office, the sun was already beginning to set over London. The sky was orange, almost red, as if the city itself recognized that something monumental was happening. Marina offered to take Evelyn to her home in Brighton, away from the chaos of the capital, where she could rest and recover in peace. Evelyn accepted without hesitation. In the car, as London fell behind, Evelyn placed her hand on her belly and felt the baby kick. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Your mommy is learning to be strong. She's learning to fight, and when you're born, you'll find a mother who will never again accept being humiliated. I promise." Marina looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror and smiled. "That boy will have the bravest mother in the world." Evelyn smiled back, a small but genuine smile. "And the fiercest grandmother too." They laughed, for the first time in many hours, and that laughter sounded like a premonition, like the calm before the storm that was to come. Because Richard Maxwell and Marianne Thompson still didn't know, but their lives were about to fall apart, and the woman they had underestimated, humiliated and betrayed was just beginning to show what she was capable of. War had been declared, and this time Evelyn was not alone. Marina Nightingale's house in Brighton was a refuge from another world. Built on the rocks with a privileged view of the sea, the property combined discreet luxury with genuine comfort. Evelyn had spent so many summers there in her childhood, running barefoot on the sand, diving into the natural pools, listening to the sound of waves breaking in the early morning. Returning to that place after so long was like truly coming home, to a home that had never ceased to exist, merely waited patiently for her to find her way back. In the first few days, Evelyn did little more than sleep, eat and walk on the beach. Marina respected her daughter's silence, knowing she needed that time to process everything that had happened, to allow her soul to heal before they could continue the battle. The baby seemed to sense the tranquility of the place, moving less frantically as if also resting. It was on the 4th day that Marina knocked on Evelyn's bedroom door right after breakfast. She brought with her a woman in her 40s, with short, greying hair at the temples, dressed practically in jeans and a smart shirt. There was something in her eyes that conveyed experience and compassion in balanced doses. "Evelyn," Marina introduced, "this is Carla Miller. She's a private detective, working with cases of domestic violence and psychological abuse for over 15 years. I asked her to come here because I think you need to talk to someone who understands what you've been through." Carla extended her hand to Evelyn with a gentle smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Evelyn. And before you ask, no. I didn't just come here to investigate your ex-husband. I came because I've seen many women in your situation, and I know how difficult it is to rebuild after everything falls apart. I came to offer help, not judgment." The 3 women sat on the veranda with fresh coffee and warm cheese bread. Carla began to tell her own story of how she had been married to a man who emotionally manipulated her, who made her doubt her sanity, who isolated her from friends and family. It took years until she managed to leave, and when she finally did, she decided to dedicate her career to helping other women who were going through the same thing. "It's a pattern," Carla explained, breaking off a piece of cheese bread. "Men like Richard follow an invisible manual. First, they isolate the victim from people who could warn her. Then they subtly undermine her self-esteem, with comments that seem like concern, but are actually poison. Then they create an emotional dependency, make you believe that without him you are nothing. And when they finally have total control, they can do whatever they want because you no longer have the strength to react. Evelyn felt tears stream down her face. It was exactly that. Every word Carla said resonated with memories she had buried, conversations she had normalized, moments when she had doubted herself, because Richard had planted that doubt. He had never physically assaulted her, but the emotional wounds were as real as any visible mark. Carla leaned forward, her voice firm but gentle. But here's the truth. He never wanted you to know. You've always been strong. You've always had worth. And now that you see the manipulation, it loses its power. It's like a magic trick. Once you know how it works, it stops being magic. Marina watched in silence, proud of the courage she saw emerging in her daughter. Carla stayed all day, talking, listening, helping Evelyn name feelings she didn't know how to describe. When she left in the late afternoon, she left her card and a promise. Whenever Evelyn needed to talk, she would be available. And more importantly, she left something Evelyn hadn't had in a long time: hope. Meanwhile, in London, Richard's situation was rapidly deteriorating. The financial newspaper had published the article about the irregularities in his company. It was still vague, without concrete evidence, but enough for HMRC to open a formal investigation. Investors were pulling back, contracts being re-evaluated, the reputation he had spent years building crumbling in a matter of days. And then, Leonard Cross appeared, a 35-year-old journalist who worked for a weekly investigative magazine. Leo, as he was known, had a mixed reputation in the field. In the early years of his career, he had sold his pen to the highest bidders, written stories commissioned by rich businessmen who wanted to destroy competitors or clean up their own images. But something had changed in him 2 years ago, after one of his articles contributed to a corrupt politician remaining in power. Guilt had gnawed at him ever since, and he sought redemption through more honest, more courageous journalism. When Leo learned of Evelyn Nightingale's case, something clicked. Here was a real story, with victim and villain clearly defined, with injustice that cried out for exposure. He began investigating on his own, calling sources within Richard's company, talking to employees who had been fired, cross-referencing public data with off-the-record information. It was during one of these investigations that Leo met Julia Saunders, a 26-year-old woman who had been Marianne Thompson's personal assistant for 3 years. Julia was black from the South London suburbs and had earned her position at the company through much study and sacrifice. She believed Marianne would be an example of a strong woman who could inspire her. The reality was quite different. Marianne treated her like furniture, screamed when something wasn't perfect, made racist comments disguised as jokes, humiliated her in front of other employees. Julia endured because she needed the job, because she had a family to support, because she knew that in the British job market, a black woman from the suburbs couldn't afford to quit jobs without having another one secured. But when she saw the video of Evelyn being humiliated at the event, something awoke in Julia. She too had been humiliated by those people countless times. She too knew the poison behind the elegant smiles, and she had proof. Emails Marianne had ordered deleted but that Julia had saved in a personal cloud. Messages exchanged between Marianne and Richard about the embezzlement, compromising photos. Conversations accidentally recorded when Marianne forgot the intercom open. Julia sought out Leo after reading one of his recent articles about corporate workplace abuse. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in the city centre. She arrived nervous, looking around, afraid of being recognized. She brought a USB drive with everything she had collected over the years. "I didn't do this for revenge," she explained, her hands trembling as she held the coffee cup. "I did it because I'm tired of seeing bad people win while good people suffer in silence." Leo looked at that USB drive like an archaeologist would look at a lost treasure. That was journalistic gold. That was the story that could not only clear his tarnished name, but deliver real justice. "Do you understand that this could have consequences for you too?" he asked, needing to be sure Julia knew what she was getting into. "They'll try to destroy you when they find out you leaked it." Julia lifted her chin, determination shining in her tired eyes. "I know, but I don't care anymore. I spent years feeling small, invisible, worthless. But I saw that pregnant woman being humiliated and I thought, how many more will suffer if no one does anything? So if I have to be the one to take the first step, so be it. Leo reached across the table and squeezed Julia's hand in a gesture of respect. Then let's do this together. And let's do it right. Your story will be told too, Julia, not just as a source, but as a survivor, as a hero. In the following days, Leo worked tirelessly on the story. He cross-referenced the information from Julia's USB drive with the data Carla was collecting in the parallel investigation Marina had commissioned. The two fronts met when Marina, through her contacts, learned of Leo's work and decided to support him. Not financially, that would tarnish the report's credibility, but by providing access to information he wouldn't be able to obtain on his own. That's how Leo ended up going to Brighton to interview Evelyn. She hesitated at first, not wanting to expose her private life further, not wanting to be seen as a victim in sensationalist headlines, but Marina and Carla convinced her that telling her story on her own terms was better than letting others control the narrative. The interview took place on the veranda of the seaside house, with the sound of waves in the background and the sea breeze bringing salt and renewal. Leo didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't try to elicit tears for good visuals. He simply let Evelyn speak, tell her story in her own words at her own pace. She spoke about the gradual isolation from family and friends, about the subtle comments that undermined her self-confidence, about how she was convinced that her feelings weren't valid, that she was being dramatic, too sensitive, about the loneliness of being pregnant and feeling completely alone within her own marriage. "When I saw that necklace on her neck," Evelyn said, her voice choked but firm, "it wasn't just a betrayal I saw. It was proof that everything I believed to be real was a lie. That necklace represented a moment I thought was special, a symbol of our love. To find out he gave it to his mistress was like discovering that every happy moment I cherished in my memory had been false from the beginning." Leo wrote furiously in his notebook, but stopped occasionally just to listen, to witness. That wasn't just an article. It was a document of resistance, of transformation, of a woman finding her voice after years of being silenced. "And what do you want now?" Leo asked at the end of the interview. "Revenge?" Evelyn placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "No," she replied with conviction. "I want justice. I want other women who are going through what I went through to see that it's possible to leave, that it's possible to rebuild. And I want my son to grow up knowing that his mother never accepted being diminished, that she fought, and won not through revenge, but through truth." Marina, watching from afar, felt her chest swell with pride. That was no longer the insecure girl Richard had molded. It was a woman reborn from her own ashes. Leo's article was to be published in the following week's edition, but parts of it leaked online beforehand, causing immediate impact. Social media, which days before had mocked Evelyn, now turned against Richard and Marianne. Public opinion is fickle, but when it turns with full force. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. He gave an interview to a television program, stating that everything was just a misunderstanding, that he loved his wife, that Marianne was just a colleague. But his performance was disastrous. He sweated excessively under the studio lights. His answers were evasive. When the presenter showed some of the leaked photos, Richard couldn't answer. The mask fell live for millions of viewers. Marianne, in turn, tried the opposite strategy. She disappeared. She resigned from the company. By email, cancelled her social media accounts and moved to an apartment rented in a third party's name. But Carla was good at what she did. Very good. She found Marianne in less than 48 hours and served her with a court notice. She was being sued not only by Evelyn, but also by Julia and 3 other former employees who had found the courage to report the abuses they suffered. It was Julia who had the idea to create a support group. It started small, just her and 2 other women who had been victims of workplace harassment at Tao, the company. But the news spread, other women appeared, each with her story of abuse, manipulation, humiliation. When Evelyn learned of the group, she wanted to participate. Marina initially hesitated, thinking her daughter needed more time to recover. But Carla disagreed. "She needs this, Marina," Carla argued. "She needs to see that she's not alone, that her pain is valid, that other women understand exactly what she went through. Isolation feeds shame. Community feeds healing." Evelyn went to the first meeting on a Thursday evening in a borrowed community space in a diverse London borough. There were 12 women sitting, in a circle of different ages, social classes, colours, stories, but all shared something fundamental. They had been broken by men who should have loved them, by systems that should have protected them, by societies that taught them to accept crumbs and call it a feast. Each spoke a little. Stories of psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, gaslighting, isolation. When it was Evelyn's turn, she hesitated. She wasn't yet used to being vulnerable in front of strangers. But then she looked at those faces, saw empathy where she expected judgment, saw understanding where she feared scorn. And she began to speak. She spoke for almost 20 minutes, pouring out years of contained pain. And when she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. But they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of recognition, of solidarity, of shared strength. After the meeting, Julia approached Evelyn. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "Many of us are inspired by you. Seeing you stand up gave us the courage to do the same." Evelyn hugged her, surprised. "I should thank you, Julia. Your courage in exposing the truth is changing everything." The two talked late into the night along with Carla and some other women from the group. It was there that night that the idea was born. Evelyn had financial resources through her family. Julia had experience with the corporate system and knew the flaws that allowed abuses to continue unpunished. Carla had technical knowledge of investigation and psychological support, and all had the burning desire to transform pain into purpose. "Let's create a foundation," Evelyn proposed, her eyes shining with something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. An organization that helps women in situations of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation, that provides legal, psychological, financial support if necessary, so that no one else has to feel alone like I did. The enthusiasm was contagious. Julia was already thinking about organizational structure, Carla about partnerships with psychologists and lawyers. Other women from the group offered help, contacts, ideas. There, in that humble community space in London, with uncomfortable chairs and reheated coffee, something much bigger than any of them imagined was being born. When Evelyn returned to Brighton that night, she was exhausted, but energized. She told Marina everything, who listened carefully before smiling. "I'm proud of you, daughter. Transforming trauma into action is the most powerful form of healing." And then Marina made a proposal. The Nightingale family had a commercial building in Shoreditch that was being underutilized. It could be renovated and transformed into the Foundation's headquarters. More than that, Marina offered to use her influence and connections to attract donors, establish partnerships with other organizations, and give visibility to the cause. Evelyn hugged her mother, for the first time in years, feeling that she was building something genuine, something that mattered. It wasn't about getting revenge on Richard. It was about ensuring her pain had meaning, that her story could light the way for other women to find their way out of the darkness. In the following days, everything moved quickly. Leo published the full article with interviews, documents, evidence. The repercussion was national. Richard was removed from the company presidency by board decision. HMRC deepened its investigations. Marianne was called to testify. The House of Cards was collapsing, as it always would eventually, because lies are never sustainable in the long term. Evelyn was 8 months pregnant now, her belly huge but her spirit stronger than ever. The foundation already had a name, the Rebirth Institute. It had headquarters undergoing renovation. It had a team forming. It had a purpose that went far beyond one woman and her personal story. And on a sunny November afternoon, as she walked along Brighton Beach with her mother by her side, Evelyn felt a strong contraction. Marina immediately took her to the hospital. Labour had begun, and as the contractions came in waves closer and closer, Evelyn felt no fear. she felt strength, because she knew that the child about to be born would arrive in a world where his mother had learned to defend herself, to fight, to win. Not through violence or revenge, but through truth, justice, and rebuilding. The birth of Michael Nightingale happened on a November dawn, under a full moon that illuminated the sea as if millions of diamonds had been scattered over the waves. Evelyn labored for 7 hours, each contraction a reminder of her own strength, each pain a testament that she was capable of enduring, much more than she had ever imagined. Marina held her hand throughout the process, wiped her sweat, whispered words of encouragement, and when the baby finally arrived crying strong and healthy, the two women cried together. Michael weighed 3 kilograms and 400 grams, had his mother's dark eyes and a head of black hair that made the nurses laugh with delight. When they placed the boy in Evelyn's arms for the first time, she looked at that crumpled little face and felt something fundamental reorganize within her chest. Everything she had suffered, every tear shed, every humiliation endured, suddenly made sense because it had brought her there, to that perfect moment of holding her son for the first time. "Hello, my love," Evelyn whispered, tears falling onto the blue blanket that wrapped the baby. "Your mummy went through a storm to find you, but it was worth every second. You are my miracle." Marina watched from the bedroom window, letting mother and son have their moment. She thought about how strange life was, how the worst suffering often preceded the greatest transformations. Her daughter had been broken, yes, but in the process of rebuilding herself, she had become someone infinitely stronger, more aware, more whole. Richard tried to visit them at the hospital. He appeared on the second day, bringing expensive flowers and a ridiculously large teddy bear, as if gifts could compensate for months of abandonment and betrayal. The hospital security team, instructed by Marina, did not let him go up. He stayed in the lobby for 2 hours, insisting he had the right to see his son, threatening to sue, making a scene. It was only when Marina came down personally, accompanied by her lawyer, that Richard understood that battle was lost. "You lost the right to call her your wife when you publicly humiliated her," Marina said, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "You lost the right to see your son when you chose your mistress instead of your family, and you will lose much more when the lawsuits are over. Now get out of here before I call the police." Richard tried to argue, but there was something in Marina's eyes that made him back down. It was the absolute certainty of defeat. He left the hospital with the wilting flowers in his hands and the teddy bear under his arm. A pathetic figure that some visitors photographed and that quickly became a meme on social media. The downfall of Richard Maxwell was being documented in real time by the internet, and the humiliation he had caused Evelyn returned multiplied by 1,000. 2 weeks after Michael's birth, HMRC concluded its investigation into Richard's company. The evidence was undeniable: embezzlement of funds, tax fraud, use of shell companies, overpriced contracts. The Crown Prosecution Service filed charges, and Richard was indicted for multiple corporate crimes. He would face years of legal proceedings and very likely imprisonment. Marianne attempted a plea bargain, offering to provide information about Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. But her strategy failed when it was discovered that she was not just a passive accomplice, but an active participant in several frauds. The white gold necklace, that damned necklace that had initiated the revelation of everything, was confiscated as evidence of misappropriation. The irony was not lost on anyone. Julia Saunders became a central figure in the case. Her detailed testimony, supported by the evidence she had kept for years, was fundamental to the conviction. She faced intimidation attempts, received threatening messages, had to deal with expensive lawyers trying to discredit her. But she remained firm, her dignity intact, her truth unshakable. When it was all over, tech companies vied to hire her, impressed by her integrity and courage. Julia chose a social impact startup, but maintained her volunteer work at the Rebirth Institute. Leonard Cross won the country's most prestigious investigative journalism award for his series of reports on the case. In his acceptance speech, he dedicated the award to all women who found the courage to report their abusers. "I spent years selling my pen to the highest bidder," he confessed before hundreds of journalists. "This case reminded me why I chose this profession, because truth matters, because giving a voice to the silenced is our most sacred duty. Carla Miller was hired as the Director of Investigations for the Rebirth Institute. With her experience and sensitivity, she assembled a team that helped women collect evidence of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation, something notoriously difficult to document and prove legally. Her work saved dozens of women in the Foundation's first months of operation. The Rebirth Institute was officially inaugurated in February, 3 months after Michael's birth. The building in Shoreditch had been completely renovated, now featuring offices for lawyers and psychologists, reception rooms, space for workshops and support groups, even a small nursery so mothers could bring their children during appointments. The facade was modern yet welcoming, painted in shades of green and white, with a vertical garden at the entrance, symbolizing renewal and growth. The inauguration day dawned cloudy, but without rain. Journalists from important media outlets attended, drawn by Evelyn's story and the importance of the cause. Politicians appeared for photos, as they always do when something becomes popular. But what truly mattered were the ordinary women who showed up shy and hopeful, seeking help, seeking to understand that they were not alone. Evelyn arrived at the event dressed in white, a deliberate and symbolic choice. Not the white of a bride, but the white of a new beginning, of a blank page ready to be rewritten. Michael was in Marina's arms, who held him with grandmotherly pride as they posed for photos. Helen was there, and Julia and Carla, and so many other women whose lives had intertwined through shared pain and collective healing. The press conference was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. Evelyn ascended the small stage set up in the Institute's lobby, her belly still showing signs of recent pregnancy, but her posture erect, strong, confident. Behind her, a large banner displayed the Rebirth Institute's logo, a stylized phoenix in shades of green and gold, symbolizing rebirth and hope. Cameras clicked incessantly. Spotlights illuminated her. But Evelyn didn't feel exposed or vulnerable as she had on that terrible night of the charity event. She felt powerful. She felt finally in control of her own narrative. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and firm. "My name is Evelyn Nightingale, and I am here today not as a victim, but as a survivor, as a woman who was broken and chose to rebuild herself, as a mother who decided her son would grow up seeing strength, not weakness, as a human being who learned that pain can be transformed into purpose." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "Many of you know me from the viral videos, from the humiliation I suffered at an event a few months ago. Some saw entertainment in it, others saw tragedy. I now see a turning point, because that night, however terrible it was, forced me to see truths I had been avoiding for years. It forced me to recognize that I was in an abusive relationship, that I was a victim of psychological manipulation, that I had lost myself in the process of trying to be the perfect wife for a man who never deserved me." Tears began to stream down Evelyn's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall freely without shame. "Emotional abuse is real," she continued. "Psychological manipulation destroys as much as physical violence, and society often doesn't take it seriously because it leaves no visible marks. But the marks are there, deep in the soul, bleeding invisibly but painfully. This institute exists to tell all women who are suffering in silence, you are not alone, you are not crazy, you are not exaggerating, and you deserve help, support, justice." Journalists began to ask questions, but before Evelyn could answer, there was a commotion at the building's entrance. Police officers entered, escorting 2 handcuffed individuals, Richard and Marianne. The police had chosen that moment, during the press conference, to execute the temporary arrest warrants, while investigations continued. The irony of the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Cameras turned frantically to capture Richard being led away, his head down, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat etched on every line of his body. Marianne tried to hide her face, but it was useless. The woman who once walked with arrogance in the ballroom was now led away like a common criminal. The necklace was gone from her neck, but the mark of greed and cruelty remained. Evelyn could have felt satisfaction at that moment. She could have smiled, made some triumphant comment. But she did none of that. She merely watched in silence, feeling not joy at their downfall, but sadness for the waste they had made of their own lives, for the choice they made to hurt instead of love, to steal instead of build, to destroy instead of create. When the commotion subsided and the cameras turned back to her, Evelyn continued her press conference as if nothing had happened. She answered questions with honesty and grace. She spoke about the services the Institute would offer, about partnerships with psychologists, lawyers and social workers, about the support group that met every Thursday, about the 24-hour helpline, about how every woman seeking help would be welcomed without judgment, with respect and dignity. And then, in the end, she said something that would become the Institute's motto, that would be repeated thousands of times in the following years by women finding their own strength. Truth doesn't always save, but it liberates. And today, I am free. Free from the lie that was my marriage. Free from the prison that was my silence. Free to rebuild my life on my own terms. And I invite every woman listening to this now to seek her own freedom. Because you deserve it. Because you are valuable. Because you are strong, even when you don't feel that way. The applause that followed was deafening, not just from the journalists, but from the dozens of women who had attended, from the Institute's volunteers, from people on the street watching via their cell phones as the press conference was broadcast live. Evelyn descended from the stage and was immediately enveloped. In hugs, Julia openly wept. Helen smiled with pride. Carla nodded in approval. Marina brought Michael into his mother's arms. The baby had slept through the entire press conference, oblivious to the historic moment happening around him. Evelyn kissed her son's forehead, breathed in that unique baby scent that instantly calmed her. "One day you'll understand all this," she whispered to him, "and you'll know that your mother fought, that she didn't give up, that she transformed the worst moment of her life into something that helped thousands of other people." The following months were intense. The Rebirth Institute served over 500 women in its first 6 months alone. Devastating stories, but also stories of overcoming. Women finding the courage to leave toxic relationships. Women learning to recognize signs of manipulation. Women rediscovering their self-esteem and worth. Evelyn divided her time between caring for Michael and working at the Institute. It wasn't easy, but she had built a solid support network. Marina helped her with the baby, completely in love with the role of grandmother. Helen offered emotional support whenever needed, and at the Institute, a dedicated team ensured the mission continued even on days when Evelyn needed to focus on being a mother. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in prison for corporate fraud and money laundering. Marianne received 5 years. Both also faced civil lawsuits that would leave them financially ruined for decades. The company Richard had built was sold, its assets divided among creditors, and a significant portion allocated to compensate employees who had been harmed by the fraudulent schemes. Evelyn could have kept part of that money. Technically, she had a right to it as his wife even while divorcing, but she refused every penny. "I don't want anything that comes from lies and theft," she explained to the lawyers. "I have my own resources through my family and the honest work I'm building. I prefer to sleep peacefully knowing my money is clean." The divorce was finalized on a rainy June day. Evelyn signed the papers without tears, without regret. She was closing one chapter to begin another. Richard had given up custody of Michael, acknowledging that he was not fit to be a father. Evelyn felt sorry for her son for a moment, for growing up without a father. But then she remembered that an absent father was better than a toxic father. Michael would have a grandmother, would have aunts and uncles through the friends she had made, would have examples of good men who would eventually appear in his life. He would have love, and that was what truly mattered. 1 year after the inauguration of the Rebirth Institute, Evelyn was on Brighton Beach on a Sunday afternoon. Michael, now 15 months old, crawled on the wet sand, laughing at the waves that came and went. Marina was beside him, building a sandcastle with her grandson, her hair now completely white but her eyes still shining with vitality. Helen had brought her daughters to play with Michael, and the children ran along the beach with the infinite energy that only little ones possess. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, and Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quietude, of gratitude, of peace. She thought about how much she had changed in so little time. The woman who had been humiliated in that hotel ballroom seemed to belong to another life, another person. That Evelyn was fragile, broken, lost. This Evelyn was strong, whole, found. Not because the pain had completely disappeared, but because she had learned to carry that pain differently, to transform it into something greater than herself. The Rebirth Institute had expanded. It now had 3 branches in London and plans to open units in other capital cities. Thousands of women had already been helped. Hundreds had found the courage to report their abusers. Dozens had completely rebuilt their lives. And it all began with a pregnant woman being publicly humiliated, deciding that she would no longer accept being a victim. Michael began to cry, tired from the beach and hungry. Evelyn picked him up, wiped the sand from his chubby little hands, kissed his salty face. "Let's go home, my love," she whispered. And as she walked along the sand with her son in her arms, her mother by her side, and the sun setting behind them, Evelyn smiled. A genuine, deep, true smile, because she had finally understood something fundamental. True strength doesn't come from never falling, but from getting up every time life knocks you down. It comes from transforming scars into wisdom, pain into purpose, tragedy into triumph. It comes from choosing every day to be greater than your circumstances, stronger than your suffering, braver than your fear. Marina looked at her daughter and saw not just the woman she had become, but the woman who had always been there waiting to be discovered. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Evelyn squeezed her mother's hand, the waves wetting her bare feet. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for coming back when I needed you most, for reminding me who I always was." "You always knew who you were," Marina replied. "You just forgot for a while, but you're back now, and it's beautiful to see." As they walked back to the house, Michael asleep in Evelyn's arms, the sky exploded in final shades of red and gold. It was the end of another day, but the beginning of so many others. Days of work at the Institute, of lives being rebuilt, of women finding their voices. Days of watching Michael grow, take his first steps, speak his first words. Days of laughing with friends, building memories, living fully. The story of Evelyn Nightingale did not end with a fairy tale happy ending. It ended with something better, with truth, with justice, with purpose, with the certainty that even in the darkest moments there is always the possibility of light, that even when all seems lost, there is always a path to rebuilding. That pain can be transformed into something beautiful, into something that helps others find their own way. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Evelyn made a silent promise, to herself, to her son, to all the women who were still fighting their own battles, the promise that she would continue fighting, continue building, continue being living proof that it is possible to be reborn from the ashes, to rebuild from scratch, to find strength where before there was only weakness. Because truth doesn't always save, but it liberates. And today, tomorrow, and all the days to come, Evelyn would be free, truly, completely, gloriously free. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Evelyn Nightingale, of Marina, of Julia, of Carla, and of all the courageous women who appeared on this journey has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this story of overcoming, courage, and rebirth, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you most. What moment made you cry? What phrase stayed etched in your memory? Do you know anyone who needs to hear this message of hope? Every day we bring intense stories like this that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that show it's possible to rebuild after the storm, that prove that strength lies within each of us waiting to be discovered. And remember, if you or someone you know is going through a similar situation, seek help. You are not alone. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be free. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life, love, and the courage to start anew.